Oh, well. Hello, Barcelona. Pleasure to be here, and plenty of you. My name is Marcus. I'm from FIELD. And yeah, we have 170 slides for you to go through. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. We tried ChatGPT to write a smooth talk for us, but I got locked out. So I'm the co-founder and ECD of FIELD. I'm an artist, designer, director. And maybe first to introduce who are we and what are we doing. So we would describe ourselves as a global creative design and innovation studio. And maybe you've seen that we've been around for quite a while now. So we've actually been here at OFF 10 years ago, started in 2009. And the team's now pretty much spread all over Europe. I mean, we had our base originally in London, starting out in London in 2009, opened an office in Berlin in 2018. And thanks to Brexit, the team kind of disappeared and got very remote. Has spread all over Europe, but we try to get them all together whenever we can. Roughly in total, like at its core, we're about 25 artists, designers, developers, producers, and each one of us is from a very different set of backgrounds and disciplines. So we have architects, graphic and 3D and motion designers, generative and visual artists, creative directors, producers, strategists, and front-end and back-end developers, very serious guys. We are roughly organized in 4 teams who pretty much run their own projects very independently. So it's like 4 subfields in FIELD. And then it means for every bigger project, we can kind of reconfigure, reshuffle things as it's needed and find the best combination of skills and talent as it fits. And obviously that also helps for a bit of creative exchange. So there's not really an office location. So Berlin works with Amsterdam and London, and it's all a mix. Every few months there's a new mix. The culture itself, I'd say, is very food obsessed. Something we take great pride in. Our big Friday lunch cooking sessions. We're lucky in London to have a French chef. He's grown up in a French restaurant. This very talented man, but you're not allowed to criticize the food or choose your own salad sauce. That causes massive controversy, even the definition of what is a salad. In Berlin, we have a bit of a problem that everyone is a vegan. And the studio, although it's a really beautiful space, it's in a bit of a remote location. So, you know, Berlin, hard to find a space. So it means the team basically has to cook for themselves every day, and it means that they're constantly inventing new things, like vegan salmon and seafood, which doesn't exist, but there's pictures of it. We're also a little bit drone obsessed. Some of us have tattoos, and there's a bit of an unhealthy relationship with all kinds of experimental photography things. So, and you can even strap lasers to drones. And I'm fairly proud to say we'd probably crush anyone at ping pong. What's going on in the studio? We do a lot of self-initiated art. We spend a great deal amount of time doing these kind of projects, often involving cultural institutions, cultural projects. And whenever we can, we grab all these drones and things and go on a journey, a field trip. Like here we went to Death Valley and explored the world beyond our screens. Preferably in really remote and exotic places, and sometimes a little bit strange. So what do we actually do? We are, I'd say, if I describe us, the studio, we're an innovation, design, and technology partner for some of the world's biggest brands. Little shout out to Fernando, I think, over there, who's crafted this. He's a genius Houdini. Ah, there he is. Genius Houdini wizard. Yeah, and what we do, I guess, we come into play whenever there's radical change, and there's a lot of it right now. Obviously, as you know, technology, economy, society, and our environment is changing, and that has a huge impact of how we deal with communications, and yeah, how we should respond to it. And there's a lot of confusion out there. So we believe that strong cross-disciplinary teams and a very highly collaborative approach are needed to find new solutions and step out of these kind of trodden paths. So that's why we don't just spend time making things, but we actually do a great amount of research before every project, discussing future scenarios and strategies with clients and in the team. But to give you an idea of what actually comes out of it, at the end of the day, we create future spaces. So that means immersive digital and physical spaces where they have the power to listen and to speak. They're fully dynamic, interactive experiences using real-time physics and the latest sensors and game technologies. And quite often that ends up as a commissioned artwork that represents the spirit of a space and place, brand, or cultural institution. Quite often these pieces transform large and complex abstract data sets that are really hard to understand into something that is more of an emotional and relatable piece of art. Quite often they become places for an almost spiritual, audiovisual, immersive experience. And then we take this research and everything that we've learned and played with, and we apply it to design quite often flagship experiences for brands. Often it's a lot of progressive sport and technology companies and fashion brands, and we do that kind of all across the world, and also at home in London. So that was a project for On Running, started as a very small thing in one store, and then gradually got upgraded and moved to other locations. The other side of the studio takes all this kind of technology research and knowledge and develops it into what we call future brands. So brand identities, visual languages for technology or fashion and beauty. We create campaigns, image making, and we develop, like, sometimes we take it all of that together and develop comprehensive design systems that kind of touch every part of what a brand does and wants to be these days, from physical to virtual and digital experiences. A bit of a new side of the studio that's kind of launched last year is we got much closer to talking with these brands to what are they actually want to do in the future, where they want to go. And that leads us to product innovation work where we develop visions together, like what's possible, how would it look like, and how could we get there? So we ask questions like, could we measure the effect of good design on the health and well-being of people, and use that information to create new experiences? So this kind of time of change, I think, gives us actually a lot of new opportunities to come up with plenty of ideas. And that leads us to today's topic, and my friend and colleague, Xander. Please welcome.
Thank you, Marcus, and thanks everyone for coming to see us. I'm Xander. I'm one of the creative directors in London at FIELD. And I want to kind of change the second part of this to, now you know what we do, kind of how do we do it, and how have we advanced to this stage as a studio. So this is kind of a creative survival guide in times of radical change by FIELD. And we always say that we work at the, you've probably never heard this phrase before, but the intersection of art and technology. And I want to talk a little bit more about this phrase and what this kind of means and how that kind of affects our work. So when we're talking about art, we're really talking about the aesthetics that we make. We mean the culture that we're creating and the ideas that we form in our minds, and these become the modern myths that we collectively consume and create. And then when we talk about technology, we're really talking about the tools that we use to communicate and create and explore. And there's a unique relationship between them, which is that new ideas, they create new tools, and new tools, they create new ideas. And it's a continuous feedback loop, essentially, that allows both fields to grow and evolve. That's because art informs technology, and technology breaks limitations. And that's something we always try to do, and hopefully sometimes we succeed to break those. And I want to explore a little bit as designers how we can leverage this cycle and how we leverage this cycle to push the boundaries and challenge the way that we see the world. And that's important because our ideas become our culture, and to pull from Arthur C. Clarke's rules, the only way of discovering the limits of what's possible is to venture a little bit past them into the impossible. So to give a little quick example of this in action, the first time I was at OFFF Festival in Barcelona was 10 years ago, and it was my first introduction to fields. I saw Marcus here on stage, and he was talking about skateboarding as one of his main pieces of inspiration, and specifically Rodney Mullen, I think. And it turns out many people at FIELD have skateboarding in their roots, in their culture, so it felt quite poetic for me to come back 10 years later and use skateboarding as a sort of obvious visual guide to this process. So I want to start out with a little, very short history of skateboarding from the perspective of designers too young to have lived it. And there's a fundamental creative loop in the development of the sport, I think, which, again, guides us very closely. And essentially, in the 1950s, there were new tools. Kids started nailing wheels to 2x4s for fun. It was a new tool. It was a new toy. And that brought about new ideas. When the surfer community got hold of it, they started to like push the limits and push the boundaries and be more creative with the way that they use those tools by mimicking riding waves. And that actually became really dangerous because just the wheels they used were metal, they didn't really grip, they slipped over. So there were new tools, new technologies, and these were things like polyurethane wheels or kicktails, and that led to new ideas. You know, suddenly we could ride vertically or we could get air, and it was kind of like magic that these new things could happen. And then there were new tools and new ideas, and new tools and new ideas, and more new tools and more new ideas. And at the end of all this, like what we see now is a culture that's kind of completely unique from its surfing roots and is its own real thing. And that's just really the magic of incremental progress and change. And again, it goes back to the feedback between art and technology. It's a creative process, it's a development process. And with each innovation building upon the last, it creates a sense of awe, wonder, almost like myth and legend, as the accomplishments of talented individuals seem somehow divine or magical. And as artists and designers, when we observe the incredible work of other people, like plenty of wonderful people here, it sometimes feels, I think, especially as a young person entering the space, that it's unattainable, and we don't always witness the gradual evolution of ideas and technology. Instead, we're presented with the polished final product, so it's easy to feel overwhelmed. So today, I want to present ourselves not necessarily as designers, but explorers of myth and magic. You know, we have the power to bring shape to the world, and hopefully it's a bit of a peek into how we've evolved these projects that we do and how we work, and dispel some myths with the younger people and be an interesting insight for others of you. And I think this is particularly relevant right now with all the new advancements in art and design and tech that we see, especially in the creative field. So back over to Marcus for a second.
Yeah, and whenever you sort of venture out into a new journey, I think it's really important to understand where you're based and where are your seeds and what are the kind of core ingredients of what you're working with, and maybe a bit of a background, because in hindsight, maybe everything seems very logical and obviously makes sense, but when you're in the now, trying to decide on your next creative move, and it can be very confusing. Should you learn this tool or that tool? Should we get involved here or there? And it's hard to navigate. So a bit of an example how that worked out for me personally is I started in this art school in Germany in Kassel. It was an art and design school, and it followed the Bauhaus principle, which effectively translates into it gives you no guidance at all. So you have a space, and you do whatever you want or you have to do, but it's a little bit like, it's like real life. You're on your own. So I knew I was in love with like modern painting, artists like Gerhard Richter, David Schnell, and so forth. But honestly, I probably have already been so intoxicated by the digital age that having no undo function was really massively scary and put me off on ever really taking a large canvas and trying to fill it. The other kind of love was Swiss graphic design and really clean Josef Müller-Brockmann, Massimo Vinelli, and so on, these like classics. So I've adored them so much. But at the same time, it wasn't very clear what could I possibly add to it that hadn't been done before. I think that is a feeling that comes in again and again. How do you add something to something that already seems awesome, seems great? Hasn't everything been done before? The internet is full of JPEGs. So why do we need another JPEG? For me, it was like I kind of let go of these primary goals a little bit and drifted away into, at the time, it was kind of a growing community called processing, where I've learned things like creative coding and really weird things where people will create simulations of quasi-genetic algorithms that grow or emerge these creatures over time. Like they are not designed. It's just an effect, an artifact of an algorithm. If you keep running the simulation for long enough, hundreds or thousands of these creatures emerge, and over time they actually get better at moving forward or fulfilling certain goals. And I thought, it's really weird. It's a little bit ugly looking, to be honest. But it's really cool. And something clicked all of a sudden. And we're here again in skateboard land with the energy that I grew up with, and that was my culture at the time, like audio-visual synergy in movement. And that was missing from the painters and the typographers. That didn't exist before. The animation tools were pretty crap, to be honest. It wasn't there, and that's when I discovered this idea of generative design, and how about putting code and design together, two very different ingredients, and which seems more like an accepted thing today, but back then it was like designers wouldn't touch it at all. So one night, I kind of started taking these simulations of flocking birds and this idea of typography and put it all together and sort of guide them around the letters and maybe do a bit of abstract painting with them. And then suddenly I had type made from light and particles, and that was my first generative thing in 27. And I was so excited by this idea that we kind of decided we really need to dedicate the studio or our work to it, and wrote a thesis called Aesthetical Systems, essentially. And it even seemed like this area of possibilities was so vast, because all of a sudden we had some new ingredients that popped up that no designer had used before, and together in conjunction. So we drew this map where at the center it's design and visual arts, but then there's all these outside influences, for example, interactivity or artificial life or generative process and design. And I realized if you take any combination of those different ingredients, it gives you a new idea, it gives you a new project, a new approach to do something. And that really has become the sort of guiding thought in a way for the studio. And when we started out in London a few years later, we sort of applied it quickly, this idea of translating the dynamics of one thing into a very different context of another thing. For example, here, taking sound waves and sound visualizations and turning that into 10,000 digital prints.
So, as Marcus explained, he changed the way that he centered on design, and we were doing it in a much more generative way. It was a new way of approaching it. But I think one of the most important things will always be the way that we tell stories. No matter how much the tools change that we use, no matter what things are invented, it's all really about communication. It's the way that we talk. And there's plenty of tried and true metaphors we use in design. I think when it comes to new tech, we should really try and stop using the same visuals necessarily and try and invent something that really complements the meaning. And if you Google AI right now on Google Images, you end up with something like this, some brain with dots and lines and it's all blue, or maybe you'll get a computer chip, or maybe you'll get a brain with a computer chip. or maybe a robot who's confused, or the Matrix, some kind of chain thing. And it's not very friendly or approachable. And this is technologies that are supposed to be mass adopted. So we like to try and investigate what's like a more human approach to designing these things. So to give you an example of this, this is a commission that we did for Wired magazine in 2018, and they came to us and they said, hey, can you try and visualize these new technologies that would change the world in the near future? And here we are now, and I think one of the most transformative years because of some of these technologies. And as designers, we can kind of think about it and say, hey, if we want to imagine data or processing, can we use something that's like a color scheme? Can we use something that's a bit softer? Maybe like a glass box could be a process, and we'll see a process happening inside that it just looks like someone thinking or something processing in there. And we really like to try and illustrate and visualize things using the real-world data. I think it creates a bit more of a richness as part of the data visualization field. You just get these aspects in design and these tiny details that you don't necessarily achieve otherwise when you just try to do something from nothing. But how do you go from unstructured data or some kind of thing like this and gain valuable insights, like what do we really want to show about this? What we're looking at here is actually a single transaction on the Ethereum blockchain. And the Ethereum blockchain is open and available. You can go on the internet, you can see every transaction that happened. And we have to figure out what's noise and what's real structure and design to go from something like this to something like this. And this is a visualization using our kind of glass process metaphor where we turn that data into a real thing. And every one of these blocks is a real transaction in a day of Ethereum. And every tiny block you see on there represents the size of the transaction or the amount of energy used, which is something very interesting to visualize, I feel. We should know how much energy these things use. Obviously, that's changed a bit since we've done that, but here is a little video that shows an entire day of the Ethereum blockchain. And what we're seeing here is the more red that we see come up is the more energy used. And it's just, I think, a more friendly way of visualizing these things, but also a way where you actually gain an insight into the technology itself and how it's constructed and the structure of that information. So what we did was, essentially, we built a tool in Houdini, and we imported the data, and the artists and designers, they could then use that data to design with. So it kind of changed the design process, and this new tool broke those limitations that were previously unattainable to just people who did design. They couldn't necessarily easily pull data from some vague point on the internet. And I think that's a really important aspect as well that we try and do. Field, which is the importance of collaboration. And essentially, the most kind of groundbreaking visuals or ideas tend to emerge for us when the diverse minds come together, and we actively seek out to try and build teams that are not just like artists that work in one tool, but they're artists and technologists collaborating together, where we can try and make the most of everyone's things and really gain kind of new, fresh perspectives. So here's another project that I feel really visualizes that spirit of collaboration. And again, using totally different disciplines. So this was for Adidas, and it was a running experience that we did in a few stores around the world. And we needed to try and visualize different cities and different spaces, and we were aware that we couldn't necessarily go and get footage of all those places, so we decided to use photography. So we had a bunch of photos taken of London. We did one for Beijing as well. And the experience itself is interactive. It's on a treadmill, and you run, and it's built in Unity. So people that work in Unity, you get some really talented people, but we also have graphic designers. We have other designers in the studio. And we want to allow them to be able to develop and create things. And when you look at the actual compositions themselves, there's a lot of graphic process there. Even we did use, for example, AI depth estimation to try and get some more immersive versions on the photos, but you just need that freedom to people to explore. So we built a tool a new tool, and this was to build the bridge between the developers and the designers. And it's in many games you get like level editors, but I think using it in a design process also really helps. It kind of puts tools into people's hands that couldn't do that before. And I think one of the best things about this process is that once you put a tool into someone's hands who didn't build it, they always use it in a way you didn't expect. And I think that's just like a really great way to get new ideas. They just kind of bleed out of talent when they're empowered by something like this, and I think that's really great. So all this to say is essentially we like to cultivate innovation, and the same as we saw in the scaling example, we try and build upon the knowledge that we previously gained and break the limitations by building upon that and building new ones that really levitate what we previously learned rather than always starting from scratch. So this project is Force of Nature. It's another treadmill experience, and it was built for Nike. And I think it's one of the first projects their field used Connect, which again was a new tool that allowed us to detect people and their motions and their actions and use it in some way. And the Connect became an available tool, and it let us do these kind of things and create beautiful interactive experiences. This one was for Lululemon, and it quickly became, I think, kind of the interactive idea. We saw loads of these, hey, I'm a person moving around, and we saw our fair share of dancing in front of computers to check how things work. So we wanted to challenge ourselves, I think, and build on top of that technology and find a new way to utilize the tool, create something new that would enable new creativity. So what if we remove screens entirely, and what if the interaction was not about necessarily your motion in one spot, but a much more spatial experience? So this is Together, the space between us. And it's an installation that we built in conjunction with that game company who did Journey and Sky, and it's for the Barbican's Virtual Realms exhibition, which is touring currently, I think, around Asia. And there were plenty of challenges building this. We had to get it custom fabricated from some LED guru in Belgium, and it was very disruptive with COVID happening at the time, which was a bit of a problem. But the way that we essentially took the Connect and improved upon it is we built our own tool, again, to enable new things, which lets us combine multiple Connects to track a much larger space and kind of build a whole vision, a whole image of the space that we're in. And there's Jonas waving at us right there. And there's challenges lighting them up, but it's nothing that a big piece of paper can't solve. There's always room for something like this. And here you kind of see the effect of that. We can see by using a height offset, we can track reliably kind of a space and people in a room and convert that to where they are. And that works especially well for when the light conditions could be pitch black, or when there could be strobe lights, which wouldn't necessarily work with cameras. And the result of that was this. It was a live music sequencer, effectively, where you can walk around and step under these giant rings and create a bit of music. So I wanted to show you this a little bit because the end result, unfortunately, for our documentation during COVID meant that we couldn't have more than 3 people under the rings because the amount of people we could have in a room. So here's another video that shows the final result, but unfortunately only with 3 people. So this brings us to the penultimate item in our list, and I think this is kind of the culmination of a lot of our current work. And I've named this chapter Fail Forwards, because I think, again, this is talking about the cycle of iteration, and experimentation is a foundation of innovation, but willing to fail and learn and iterate as you explore, not necessarily give up on an idea because it didn't work the first time, is something that I explore here. So this was something we tried to do for Lululemon. It was supposedly a dynamic, evolving visual design system for screens and spaces. And there was a lot of ambition in this project, I would say, and for whatever reason, it never really came to fruition. There was never enough push to bring the right infrastructure for a real-time system to really thrive. And it meant the full version was never really realized, and it essentially became a pre-recorded video that probably would have been much better just animated someone. But I think it shows that not every time you have an idea, it's always the right fit, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea or that you should not pursue it. So we tried again for Adidas, and this was a much more successful experience. They had a large array of transparent screens and different sizes and aspects that we worked with them to design. And the generative system that we built for this worked quite well, but again, the infrastructure was an issue. They had certain limitations, which meant that we had to pre-record video on the cloud. So every night before the store opened, it would be rendering videos and spit them out the next day. It wasn't really, again, quite as successful as it should have been, and I think kind of for that reason, it's a bit of a clunky solution for something that should have been quite elegant, and will probably not live as long as it should do because of that. But it looked cool. But then we kind of cracked the code in the last 2 years, I would say, and it was really that mix of the magic of incremental progress that got us here. So this was a system for Nike, and I will have to say, again, it was the collaboration with the teams over there and our teams to bring this together, and the ability to serve data. But what we're looking at essentially is a real-time live graphical system that plays across all the stores. And every screen listens to a backend system, which is a heartbeat, which everything generates to. So it means that every screen can be synchronized. And there's a bunch of different screens in every store. They have all these different form factors and all those kind of things. So the system really needs to be able to adapt. And it completely adapts seamlessly to any form they have. We went through whole design iterations and graphic design and rules and built a system and a tool out of that, which then created these things. And then all the compositions are dynamic and generative, and it just uses assets that the client can then upload and switch in and out and just create constant, evolving new content. And there are plenty of challenges, as usual, like adapting to totally new campaigns and colors and products and other visuals they want to create. They still want to be able to do that and put them in there, but now they can serve them across to anywhere much more easily and keep the kind of format of the stores and the kind of branding of the stores that they're doing. And in addition to that, because it's real-time and live, it allows us to do more data visualization, which we love. So we worked with Nike, and they have the NRC apps and other apps, and that means we can serve what the running conditions are locally to every city. We can talk about how many football pitches you might have in your area, or what events are happening, and really bring those kind of local aspects of storytelling to every store. And this is interesting, I think, because it breaks limitations for building this, not just for us, but also for the client themselves, because now they have no limitations in opening new stores. They don't have to worry about necessarily making content. They know it's going to get served everywhere, and it means they can have much more digital screens, which I think is good for all of us. And because it's an evolving software and a collaboration, this tool can continuously be evolved. It doesn't just stop there. You can keep building it. It's a bit like an operating system, I guess. And we currently have it running in London, Seoul, Miami, and a bunch of other locations to come. And it really kind of represents a culmination, I think, of all the processes we went before, making these data visualizations, making graphical design systems, making procedural generation things, and just taking all of those steps to make something that was much bigger than the whole, which we could not have done without going through all those tiny little steps. And then on to Marcus again for a talk about this.
Yeah, and I guess it sort of leads us to we kind of moved from being designers of things or designers of experiences and singular visual outputs to designers of systems. And I guess if we look around the world, if we look at the world around us, like whenever anyone posts a new thing on Instagram, it's like you get your like, you get your clap, but people are very interested in what's the system that was built to create this. And we think this way of architecting systems, composing them on a larger scale, that is really the next step for design and branding and where we want to go. And we even dedicated a new studio to that, which Xander is leading. And I think there's a lot more to come in the future. It's a whole new way of collaborating with clients and building these kind of long-term relationships that continuously evolve and can change over time, because ultimately it's a network of modules, and you can swap in a new AI module and you can take a new interactive module, and that's kind of the future path for us. So I think generally speaking it leads us to the question, what's next for creatives? And maybe we're at a time where we sometimes feel a bit challenged, and I'm sure you've seen all these like news articles out there. Are designers redundant, and is AI killing all our jobs? But I felt it's important to sort of remember that it's good to take this beginner's mindset, and it's maybe sometimes a bit scary, because obviously you've invested in your tools and you're confident and you have knowledge and expertise, but that also means that you're set in a certain way. And being a beginner can be a bit of a liberation in one way, because you don't have any expectations, you don't have to create amazing things from the start. It's a process of discovery, and you're allowed to make mistakes. And it's something I really treasure. A few years back, a good friend of mine, Bradley G. Monk, really got me into this idea of photography, and I always had a bit of too much respect for photography, similar with painting and other things, but he taught me about you have to get this infrared camera and it can do awesome things. So I got one of those and played a bit around and probably did things that I shouldn't have done and a normal photographer probably wouldn't have done, pushing things to an extreme limit and opening up the sensor and modifying things. But it got me these images of cacti in Lanzarote, which are kind of photographed through a sort of broken sensor. And yeah, I felt that it opens up the aesthetic and opens up a new field of possibilities. So it was quite refreshing to see. The other day I thought, what if I use this and I throw it into these new AI engines and I can train an algorithm on it? What would it do? And how would the AI look at nature, and would it be different to what I'm seeing? And the result are some kind of strange creatures that kind of evolved out of it just by playing around with the data set. And this is not using existing data sets from somewhere else, but it's using my own material, but with these new tools. And then all of a sudden, you can create things that are totally impossible and you wouldn't be able to render in a million years.
Cool. So we're kind of running out of time, and I think we have a lot more slides to do. So I'm going to kind of rush through this. We have a whole section about AI tools, because obviously with the whole idea of new tools, that's what's coming up. And I think it's on everyone's mind. I'm sure there's plenty of people talking about it. We have, Adobe Firefly Runway Gen 2 coming out just last week, or this week even. And I think it can be a bit scary. But essentially, as creatives, it can seem quite homogeneous and inconsistent, I think, when you look at the outputs from things like Midjourney. Everything's kind of the same style. So what makes one artist's work unique from someone else's is the experiences and influences that they've gathered throughout their life. Everything you've been exposed to, everything that inspires you creates a kind of legacy of creativity. And that's what makes you, something that really empowers you. So I think if you want to make use of these tools, it's the same as ever. It's like try and find new ideas, try and build your own models, almost create like a digital companion that can help you on your journey and help become a unique aspect, the same as you are as a designer. So I have a bunch of things here which I'm just going to skip through that just show a singular style, essentially, rather than something being totally different. It really shows you can achieve something that's a bit more consistent using these tools and apply the same kind of concepts to other things. Got 50 seconds here, guys. And it kind of creates artifacts of art. And I'm going to just jump to the last slide for this. But essentially, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and AI is a huge thing of it. It's no different. So I think the only question that really remains for us is, what new ideas do we have to push things forward? How are we going to build new culture, and how are we going to really use this to our advantage to build on top of everything that you've learned before, not just create kind of the same things because we can push things out. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to us.
Well done.